Hi guys, welcome back to Spelling and Word Study. My name is Mrs. Rhoades and I'm here to get you started on Unit 19, the ENT and ENCE endings. Please take a second to gather your materials. You will need your green book open to page 119. You will also need some colorful pens, markers, or crayons. Remember, whatever I mark on my board, you should be marking on your page. Please save room for a key as well. If at any point I'm moving too fast, please pause the video and catch up. All right, so we have spent several weeks now learning about derivational suffixes. Those are groups of letters that we can tack on to the end of a word to change its part of speech. Last week we looked at the suffixes ENT and ENCE, and we learned that you can kind of switch back and forth to change those words from adjectives to nouns back and forth. So for instance, you could take distance and change it to distant, or distant and change it back to distance, and there were a bunch of other examples as well. Well, this week we're going to notice that something very similar happens with words that end with ENT and ENCE. In many cases, we can take an adjective that ends with ENT, a word like different, and we can change the ending to ENCE, difference, and it becomes a noun. So, get ready to mark up your list. But first, I want to read the words to you. Now, you'll notice I went ahead and broke them into syllables. So those purple vertical lines are our syllable breaks. And then I also checked off the stressed syllable in each word. So hopefully you find that helpful. All right, please repeat after me. Affluent, apparent, competent, condolences, consequence, consistency, eloquent, equivalent, frequency, incompetent, independence, indifferent, interference, permanent, persistent, preference, presidency, prevalent, superintendent, turbulence. Lots of really, really great vocabulary this week. So if nothing else, try to memorize the meanings of some of these words, okay? So let's start by choosing a color. And I want to look at a word like affluent. Do you notice it ends with ENT? Affluent is an adjective. It means wealthy, okay? If you are affluent, you have a lot of money. I can change that to a noun by changing affluent to affluence. So for instance, you drive into certain communities and they've got huge houses and fancy cars, and you think, wow, there's a lot of affluence in this community, a lot of money. So we have our adjective, we can easily switch it to a noun or vice versa. We see that again with the word competent. If somebody's competent, they know what they're doing. They can do it, right? We have faith in their competence, okay? Their ability. So when schools hire teachers, they have to go through a whole interview process, right? They have to have letters of recommendation. They have to have proof that they took classes. They need to show their competence. They need to prove that they're competent enough that they're able to teach a room full of kids. So competent and competent go together. I want to look at eloquent next. If somebody is eloquent, they're well-spoken. They know the right things to say, right? Maybe they give a really good speech or they write a really thoughtful note, but if they are eloquent, They pick out the perfect words. And usually we are amazed by their eloquence, their ability to speak so beautifully. Equivalent is another adjective. I'm going to put ADJ next to each of those to remind myself that all the words we're talking about right now are describing words. So equivalent means equal, right? You've probably heard this in math class. You probably have worked with equivalent fractions like 1/2 and 2/4. Those are equivalent, right? And sometimes you have to prove their equivalence. Maybe you have to draw a picture to show that 1/2 is the same as 2/4, right? So you show their equivalence. Incompetent, well, we talked about competent. Incompetent is the opposite of that, right? If a person is incompetent, if they can't do their job, if they keep messing up and they're not learning, then they might get fired for their incompetence. They're not competent, right? We've talked about that in prefix before. Indifferent. This is a funny word because you see the word different hiding in there and you think that indifferent must mean not different, but that's not the case. If you're indifferent, you don't care. You don't have an opinion. So if my husband says to me, should we have burgers or chicken for dinner tonight? I'm like, I'm indifferent. I don't really care. They both sound good, right? So I'm indifferent. And when I shrug my shoulders, I am showing my indifference. Okay? People shrug because they're indifferent. It doesn't matter to them. So that's also an adjective. Permanent. If something is permanent, it stays forever. Think about permanent marker, how hard it is to get that off of fabric or furniture. So if something is permanent, it lasts forever. That's an adjective. You can expect permanence. You can expect it to last. Persistent. If something's persistent, it keeps going, right? Think about someone with a persistent cough, right? They just can't shake it. They've been coughing for weeks, right? Think about a child who really wants something and they keep asking, they're begging over and over. They're being persistent. So when you're persistent, you keep going, you keep asking, you keep trying, right? Until people notice your persistence. Okay, so that's also an adjective. Prevalent, another great adjective. If something is prevalent, it's common. Okay, when I was a kid, chicken pox was very prevalent. There were outbreaks in every school, right? And the little pock marks, the little itchy marks were prevalent as well. They were very common. The prevalence of chicken pox, I think was probably more prevalent in the winter months than the summer months. So the prevalence, not so much in the hot months. So prevalent and prevalence. And I think that's it. So let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Okay, so wherever we see a blue box, that is an ENT ending, and that is a noun that was turned into an adjective. Okay, so prevalence became prevalent and eloquence became eloquent. You get the idea. All right, now we have words like apparent. That's an adjective, but there's no noun form. Appearance isn't a word. Appearance is a word, but that's totally different. I I don't see anything else like that. So for brown, I'm just going to say equals ENT, but that is an adjective, okay? But then we have one more ENT ending right here. Superintendent, but guess what? That is a noun because the superintendent is the person in charge. The superintendent of a school system runs all the schools. The superintendent of a hotel, not a hotel, an apartment building is in charge of the apartment, okay? So a superintendent is a person. We see this ending with words like resident or president. Those words are all ENT endings, but unlike most ENT endings, they are all nouns. Okay, so now let's look at some of our ENCE endings. Okay, so consequence. A consequence is a result, right? We talk about natural consequences, or if a kid gets in trouble, they get a consequence. So there's some sort of result, something that they caused to happen. There is an adjective form, and that's consequent. And you've probably seen the word consequently, which is the adverb form. We have independence. There's our noun. But we have an adjective form. I bet you know what it is. Independent, right? If you're independent, you can do it yourself. You can live on your own. You don't need help. And then turbulence. That's also a noun. When you're on an airplane and it's stormy or you're going up into the clouds, it might feel a little bumpy. That's called turbulence, okay? So if something is turbulent, there's a lot of like thrashing and up and down type of stuff, right? People can have a turbulent year, meaning there were lots of ups and downs and lots of sudden changes. Okay, so all of these words are nouns. They all end with ENCE, and they're nouns, but they easily switch from adjective to noun. Okay, and then we have condolences. So that ends with ENCE, but there's not really an adjective form, and there's not really a verb form either. That word just kind of stands alone. But if you give someone, if you express your condolences, it is a noun. You're showing someone that you're sorry for their loss, right? So if your neighbor's mother died, you might bring a meal, you might send a card, you might send flowers. Those are all ways to express your condolences. So condolences are like sorry feelings. Okay. Do we have any other ENCE? And oh, interference is a noun, but there's no adjective form. Like interferent isn't a word, but there is a verb here, right? Because if you interfere, if you butt in, you are causing interference. Preference is also a noun, but there's no adjective form. Instead, there's a verb, right? If you prefer something, you are expressing your preference. If you want a table, you go to a restaurant, you want a table near the window, or you want a booth or a high top, you are expressing your preferences. You're telling them what you prefer. So over here, I'm just going to write pink box equals ENCE, and they are all nouns, right? But sometimes they have a verb form hiding in them, interfere and prefer. All right, I apologize. This is getting really messy here. But I do want to draw your attention to one more ending, because sometimes instead of ending with ENCE, our nouns end with ENCY, right? So if something is consistent, it's done with consistency, right? Consistent means the same over and over again, right? So maybe my best friend is always late, but at least she's consistent. She always shows up 10 minutes late, okay? So consistency is just the state of being the same over and over again. We see this with frequency, right? The frequency of something means how frequently or how often it happens. So frequent becomes frequency, consistent becomes consistency. And then this is an interesting one because we talked about superintendent. Well, the noun form, we actually have two nouns here, because a president is a person who runs a company. So president is a noun, but then the presidency is the office of the president, right? So we have two different noun endings that are related. So all of our orange box words are NC endings, and those are all nouns. Did I miss anything? Whew. Like I said, lots of great vocab. So if nothing else, I hope you're learning the meanings of some of these words and are going to try using them. There goes a marker. All right, one more thing I want to talk about with you. When you get to page 122, you have a new Latin root, and that root is SIST, S-I-S-T. That comes from Latin, and it means to stand or hold a place, okay? So if you think about the word assistant or assist, an assistant stands next to you and helps you do your work, right? If you assist someone, you stand by, right? If you insist on something, you stand your ground. You're saying, no, I want this to happen. We have consistency. There it is, right? If you think about the word consistent, if something's consistent, it holds its ground in that it stays the same, it holds the same shape over and over and over again, right? So at least they're consistent. If we talk about consistency, like let's say you're making cake batter and you're stirring it up, you have to look at the consistency. Is it too thick? Is it too watery? Is it too lumpy? How is it holding up? So there's that hold piece. We also see this with persistent, right? Remember I said if you're persistent, you keep coming over and over and over again. You're standing your ground, right? If something persists, it lasts. It holds on. I think that's it for our list. Consistent, persistent, but you will see other great examples on this page. All right, I know I threw a lot of information at you, but I am confident that you can do this. Good luck, and I will see you next time.